Hey guys! Today we're going to learn in Bible about the history books of the Old Testament and the poetry and wisdom books of the Old Testament. So we are going to find out what those books are, who wrote them, some key characters, and some key stories that you find in those books. So let's read about those books now. Joshua is our first history book. The author was mostly Joshua. Some key characters were Joshua and Rahab. Some key stories were Rahab and the spies. Joshua fights the Battle of Jericho. Another history book is Judges. The author was possibly Samuel. Some key characters were Deborah, Gideon, Samson, Delilah. Some key stories, Deborah, the only female judge, Gideon's battle, Samson and Delilah. Ruth. Author unknown, maybe Samuel. Key characters, Ruth, Naomi, Boaz. Some key stories, Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. 1 Samuel. Author unknown, possibly Samuel and prophets. Key characters, Eli, Hannah, Samuel, Saul, Jonathan, David, and Goliath. Some key stories, Eli and Samuel, Saul becomes king, Samuel anoints David, David and Goliath, Saul tries to kill David, Jonathan and David's friendship. 2 Samuel. Author unknown. Key characters, David. Some key stories, David becomes king, David's sin, Nathan the prophet. 1 Kings. Author unknown. Key characters, David, Solomon, Elijah. Some key stories, Solomon becomes king, Solomon's wisdom, Solomon builds the temple, Elijah the prophet. 2 Kings. Author unknown. Key characters, Elijah, Elisha. Some key stories, Elijah taken up to heaven, young King Josiah. 1 Chronicles. Author Ezra. Some key stories, David, Solomon. Those were the key characters. Some key stories, David becomes king. This book tells more about the book of 2 Samuel. 2 Chronicles. Author Ezra. Some key characters, Solomon, Josiah. Some key stories. This book tells more about 1 and 2 or 1 and 2 Kings. Ezra. The author was probably Ezra. Some key stories, Ezra, Darius. Some key stories, King Darius. Nehemiah. Author, Nehemiah and Ezra. Some key stories, Nehemiah and Ezra. Key characters. Some key stories, the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. And the last book of the history books is Esther. The author is unknown, possibly Mordecai. Some key characters are Esther, Mordecai, Haman. Some key stories, Queen Esther. Now, the next part, these are the poetry books. So we're moving on to the poetry and wisdom books from history. So the first poetry book is Job. Author is unknown, possibly Job. The key characters are Job, and the key stories is Job's suffering. Psalms. David wrote 73 of them. Asaph wrote 12. The sons of Korah wrote 9. Solomon wrote 2. Ethan wrote 1. Moses wrote 1. And 51 of them were written by unknown authors. The key characters are David. Some key stories are poetry, praise, songs for God. Proverbs. The author is mostly Solomon. There aren't really any key characters, and some key stories are wisdom for our lives. 2 more poetry books. Ecclesiastes. The author is Solomon. Some key characters, there really aren't any listed. And the key stories are learning from our own experiences to keep God at the center and a time for everything. Song of Solomon. The author is Solomon. Some key characters are King Solomon, the Shulamite woman. Some key stories tells about a love between a husband and wife, the importance of marriage, and God's love for his people. All right, students, so those were the history books of the Old Testament and the poetry books for the Old Testament. So go ahead and follow through the rest of your Tuesday activities, and I'll see you soon. Have a great day.